That's something different. Oh, no, it's Alexa.
We're now live.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to this pre-council meeting on the 30th of March 2022. I assume everyone can hear me. That's on Zoom. Awesome. Thank you. Hey, I just wanted to frame things up for today before we start. The first thing I just want to acknowledge the tight time frame. Only 7 days ago we were sitting in Philip Lang House down there in the chamber discussing the draft annual plan 22-23, and we're back here a week later to further consider the item. I just want to also remind us all that the recommendations in the paper that we're uplifting for this meeting remain the same. Notes this report provides supporting information for community engagement on the proposed annual plan 22-23, endorses the supporting information for community engagement on the proposed annual plan 22-23, and authorises community engagement for the annual plan 22-23 to begin. And I also just want to note that in paragraph 39 in the paper, it refers to the next steps being targeted community engagement 31 March to 29 April, and that will include meetings with partners and stakeholders we requested, and then reporting community feedback on the 25th of May to the Finance Committee, and then final adjustments to the draft estimates post the 25th May Finance Committee meeting, and then adoption of the annual plan 22-23 on the 23rd of June 2022. Like I said, we resolved to lie this item on the table. Now, since then, Kevin framed up the email that I circulated, but essentially his thoughts were in that email where there was a request to essentially review all budgets, looking for savings, look for opportunities to delay or refine work, and bottom line was no reductions to service levels as anticipated. I also just want to mention in Nick's presentation that's been circulated, I think it was circulated late last night or yesterday afternoon, late last night, whatever. Nick made it clear that as far as staff are concerned, they haven't got any other direction with regards to the proposed rate increase for 22-23, and if there was going to be any adjustment to that 18%, where those savings might come from. So as governance, we haven't given a message to staff on those matters. Last thing I want to mention, this was highlighted in Nick's email as well, is that if there were going to be any conversations that related to either contractual arrangements or the like type topics, we would need to move into public excluded. I'm just going to check with Sarah. Is there anything that you would like to say at this stage, Sarah?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not really planning on saying anything terribly much, just except to highlight that, excuse me, that it is our firm view that the kind of savings that you are looking for cannot be achieved without a likely level of decrease in service. Which is one of the reasons why it's been difficult for us to come to you with any absolute recommendations, because one of the conditions in your email was no decrease in level of service. So I think that is one of the things that will need to be reconciled today. Thank you. Thanks,
Sarah. And before we go to Nick, I'm just going to check with Kevin, co-chair of Finance, whether he has any comments to make at this stage.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Look, I just have to say that big thanks to Nick and his team for actually producing what we've asked asked for in the way of figures and everything that came out last night, and it was actually good to go through that and get just to refresh my understanding of things. I just need to make a comment on, there was a comment in there that the council asked for efficiencies and it hasn't been defined. It implies that the current LTP is inefficient. Well, that's the last thing that we actually want to do. Any business running $100 million operational budget is to stay alive is to be constantly looking for efficiencies and improvements. That's the basis of the market, and we're not at all saying that our organisation is inefficient. We're just saying, is there other ways that we can do things to help us out with this, with the pressures that our clients, our ratepayers are in at the moment. So it was never aimed to be a criticism of, we're simply wanting everyone to have a real good hard look, and is there ways of doing things. Probably one thing we had possibly before that we were looking for is there any ways that we can change our programs around that operational activities that may not necessarily be done on time, that may be able to be slipped into a different time frame. That would have been one good indication that we could have had. But no, we'll have to go through this with Nick, and again, I thank them for the work that has been done, and just reiterate that we've not been trying to criticize and say that the long-term plan is inefficient. So from me at this stage.
Thanks, Kevin. Nick, we're in your hands. Thank you.
Okay, I will. I'll look to share my screen, and then I'll just take you through quickly through the presentation, because then I think once those numbers are, or once all that information's out there, really it's then over to you as councillors to, you know, have a discussion about where you want to go to next. So I'll share screen. Okay.
No, I was thinking from a screen point of view, they don't want to see.
I can see, yeah,
No, I was talking about people on Zoom.
they can't even see me on Zoom anymore.
You want to change it?
Do you want to change
it, me?
Yeah.
No, yes, so you just to sit slightly closer together. That's all you need to do. Sorry, we're in your hands, Nick.
Okay, so hopefully there you're all looking at the cover page of the presentation. Yep. I assume you are. So a lot of the first bit the chair has already run through. So just the purpose is just that obviously this meeting is because the paper from last week was left to lay on the table. We've had the email from the chair on Friday that just points out those bullet points about what you were looking for. The last bullet point was the information that you're anticipating getting. So just there's the 5 key points that were in there. So what we've done is when we come to it later is there is a section on each of those 5 points to cover that and provide more information. The point 4 is probably the bit that is a little bit has been a little bit trickier to do. And then also in the email it said that the request was for us to review all budget areas, GMs to look for savings to fully offset the proposed general rate, ascertain what parts of the proposed targeted rate activities can be delayed or refined to minimise that rate impact, and as got mentioned, no reduction to service levels was anticipated. So I've just put there just our comments on that. As I said, points 1 to 5, we've provided information, to the extent that we've had possible in the time available. So we've given information on activities, but we haven't done a detailed review of those activities as yet. I'd still hope that the information we've provided will allow council to undertake a top-down review of the rates increase, but any detailed bottom-up analysis would still have to be undertaken to understand the impacts on the work plans and the future rates, which is that 0.4 in the request. Also, just a couple of general comments that year 2 increases, as we go through and look at them, they're not independent of current year activity. So it's important to consider the annual plan and those rates increases in the wider context of the agreed LTP work program. I did recirculate a workshop, and I appreciate you probably haven't had time to look back, but hopefully it reminded you of when we first looked at this back in October last year. We did a review of year 2 of the LTP, and that gave the context of where the year 2 work sat in relation to what we're currently doing and the whole 3-year program of the LTP. And where I say that you can't look at it independently, year 2, some of the increases that we've currently got occurring in year 1 were phased. Some of the staff increases are only happening halfway through this year. But that means that you get half the increase this year and half the increase next year. So it's not going to be as simple as just saying, oh, we can remove all the increases that are in year 2 or some of them, because some of those increases are already effectively being implemented this year. It's just that the full dollar impact hits in year 2. Also, just a point there about council hasn't provided any formal direction to staff to reduce any activities. So when we started looking at the activities and the information that you'll see, it's difficult to know exactly where you want us to target if we were to start saying, oh, we could reduce this and reduce that, because some of these things we could spend a lot of time going, well, take a particular increase or activity out, only to be told that's not what we want. The only thing that we did get told was don't suggest the helicopter and don't suggest the eco fund. So is there anything else? Before we go down this route, we don't want to turn around and spend a lot of time putting forward, oh, here's certain things that could happen, and then they're also off the table. And then the following information is intended to allow you as council to consider that 18% LTP level of rates increase in year 2, whether it should remain. And then if it is to reduce, the quantum of what that reduction should look like. If 18% is not the number, what is the number? And then give an indication of where you'd expect that decrease to come from. So which activities you want the reductions to occur in. So that was just the overarching staff comments. So
just go on to the next slide. I just got a question from Michael Laws.
Is it easier for us, and I asked this question of Sarah too, if we tell you a quantum that we're expecting, and then you look at your own budgets, which you know better than us in detail, and then make the cuts or the savings or the omissions or the whatever it might be accordingly? In other words, what are you looking for from us today? Are you looking for us for a quantum sum and say, that's roughly what we're thinking of, now off you go, please, and can you think about that, about where those savings would be, how you would make them? Or are you looking for us to identify areas where we think savings could and should be? Or both?
Yeah, both. One, I'm looking to because what we've got so far is we've been told up until last week that council was comfortable going out with 18%. Then we've heard, and even around the table last week, we heard different things. I did hear some councillors were comfortable going out to consultation. Some were comfortable with the 18%. Then one councillor mentioned a different number, and then and other numbers have been mentioned in the background since that meeting. So what we're looking for is we're actually looking for a council agreed number, because we don't have any idea what the collective position is. So if you are going to move away from 18%, it'd be nice to know what that number is, and then where you expect that to come from. And I think as we go through the next slides in the detail, it's more of a refresher of where that increase comes from and what activities it's made up of. What we'd like is then what areas are acceptable for us to go and cut and which areas aren't. Because as you go through and start looking at it, there will be areas you'll go, oh, you may not want that, like the helicopter and the eco fund. There may be other areas. And then even when we start having a look, there'll potentially be some areas where we go, well, you've got to be very clear about what the longer term or even the short term implications of looking at those areas are. So that's what we want. We want a defined position on the number, and if it is going to decrease, we'd like some guidance on where you'd expect to see those decreases coming from.
Thanks for that, Nick. We've got 3 other questions. Michael Deeker, then Kate, then Hilary.
Sorry, thanks, Andrew. It wasn't so much a question as responding to Nick, and I accept his puzzlement about where we are at in terms of a rate increase. I emailed all the councillors probably 3 weeks ago now, but I was looking through with a recommendation from me that given the circumstances we all find ourselves in, a rates increase of anything over 10% would be unacceptable for us to consult on. Now, I admit to Nick that I was looking through the other end of the telescope. I wasn't looking at where we are as an organisation with our work needs. I was looking at from the community point of view and the world circumstances they find themselves in, of rapidly increasing costs, estimated by one bank to be $150 a week per family. Now, given that environment, I then reached the conclusion, and I emailed all my council colleagues with this, that anything over 10% would be virtually impossible, not politically, but financially and realistically. So that's a response to Nick, Andrew. Thank you.
Kate.
Appreciate we raised a lot of issues at the last council meeting, and some of them I think we were given some answers and some people wanted advice on. What was suggested at the last meeting, and this is a process question, is whether we try and find the savings today and put them into the DAP or the draft annual plan, or whether we can put a comment in the up front in the document that we appreciate that the world is changing in the way that Councillor Deeker just explained, and that we will look for savings and give a target and then workshop where we could go with that over the next month and then have the hearings. Because we need to give people a chance to be heard on this. Have you had any rethinking on the advice that you gave at that meeting about that process? No.
Well, I'm trying to recall exactly what advice we did give on that, but look, we could change the narrative of what's in the information going out and highlight that we're going to be doing that. But you then get into the issue of when you get to consider the feedback you've got, and you might get feedback that says people are actually fine with the 18% because they understand what the increase is doing and they want that to occur, or they say that they're not. The question then is what do you do with that information, and it depends on then what you are going to cut out. And if, for example, you were going to cut out something that was significant, like let's, I won't give examples, but you then have to consider whether you needed to do some actual formal consultation on what you were considering doing at that point, and you might. And then you're in the position where you would go, okay, but we'll take it out of the annual plan in anticipation of doing the consultation and people will agree with it. Then you've you've predetermined your consultation at that point. So you sort of end up in a bit of a chicken and egg situation.
Can I please
Hillary.
just add to that?
Sarah.
I think it's also really important to remember that you've already consulted on the 18%. You have an LTP, you already consulted on that and you made decisions on it. So the 18% is already a decision that you've made. So I think you know, that's something to keep in mind. Now, our advice last week was effectively, you know, it would also be difficult, I think, for ratepayers to understand exactly what you are trying to do or what you're saying you will do with the rates that you collect. If when you consult, but this may change significantly hanging over it. And that was my concern, that you go out to the public with 18, but if you know that you have no intent of it being 18, then to my mind, that's not really genuine consultation. But yeah, at this late stage in the game, it does present some challenges.
Thanks, Sarah. Hillary.
I'd like to explore a wee bit further, partly what I think where Michael's question was going, or where it was going in my head, and partly that I'm not sure whether it's appropriate for us to give indications of what where reduces and increases should come from, because these aren't cuts, these are reduces and increases. So instead of having X amount of increases, half X or whatever it is. But I'm concerned that I think Michael's question was effectively asking whether it's for us to say how things should change, or for us to say what result we want, and for it to be done by you, Sarah. And there's another part to that, which is that the figures we have in front of us are different from the service level. So for us to make a comment on what would change when we don't know what service level would change is until we have what service levels are proposed to be part of the increase, it's hard for us to even make any half rational comments. So, for example, and this really is an example, it's nothing but an example. If we have, 6 vacancies in comms, and we don't know what service level would be provided by an increase in 6 people in comms, it's hard for us to not just say, oh, well, that's 6 people we don't need to employ, because we don't know what the service level that we're achieving by getting that. So I'm saying, I'm sort of reiterating the question, Sarah, partly the how do we know what service levels are being bought by that increase? And is it appropriate for us to come up with things, that's an example of what we might come up with, and it might be completely inappropriate because it might be absolutely vital for our organisation, whatever we do, to have 6 more comms people doing it. But I have no way of guessing that. So do you want us to try and guess that? And if so, do we need some service level increases so as we can see what it is we might be guessing at?
So I'm going to let Nick answer some of the service level stuff, but what I will say is this is precisely why using examples like the example you've just used is not that helpful, because those 6 vacancies are already budgeted. So they're already in this year. They're not new. So, you know, that's the thing. Like, just because a role is vacant, it doesn't mean that it's new. It doesn't mean that it's new for next year. So that's why just seeing vacancies on the face of it isn't that helpful. So that's an existing level of service. It's not about a new level of service in that particular area. But Nick, if you want to comment on the service levels more particularly.
Let's go back on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, some of the activities are almost, service levels in their own right. The example of vacancies, and regardless of what area it's in, is interesting because, we have people leaving and starting all the time, and so those vacancies, will be absorbed by other people in the teams. So what happens is you end up with a whole lot of other people picking that up, and you can only do that for a certain period of time. So in the short term, an area that might be doing something can still deliver even with a vacancy, but in the long term, it's not sustainable. And what will happen is the other staff will either burn out or fall over, and then service levels will decline and that things will not get done. But you've also got the other issue that just because there's a vacancy, the work will still have to get done. And if you take comms, for example, all of that comms work will get done. But what will happen is because there's not somebody in-house to do it, we'll have to contract work out to get communication material prepared and to get it, to release different things to the media, do things. So you'll get a false economy by just going, oh, well, don't fill vacancies. That work will still have to get done, and it will get done either in the short term by other staff working a huge amount of extra hours, or by contracting work out to ensure that that it can still keep going. And so you've got to, it's not as simple as just saying, yeah, we won't replace vacancies. The other thing is vacancies will occur in all sorts of areas, yeah, and you don't know whether the vacancies that are created, are the ones that that you absolutely can live without for any period. So I don't think it's as simple as looking at it from that perspective. You've got to look at the actual activity and what it's designed to deliver. And some of the things just naturally there will be, if you don't do it, there will be a level of service impact. For example, when we get to the slides, one of the first ones up there where there's an increase in year 2 because we decided to defer it to year 2 in the LTP to decrease year 1 is the year plan. If we decided, well, we won't do that, the simple fact is there's a level of service decrease because your whole year plan framework is now delayed. And that's the question to council. Do you want that to occur? Are you, the level of service is the year plan itself. Do you want to defer that level of service? Because that will be the impact if the cost is and the rates increase is removed.
Thanks for that, Nick. Before we go to Alexa, I think Kevin's got a question that relates to service levels. Is that right, Kevin?
Oh, they go for Alexa.
You'll come back in?
I'll come back to me.
Okay. Alexa.
Kia ora koutou. I just want to respond first to Nick's question about what's off the table or what should be off the table. As you're all well aware, I think that this is that to try and do this reduction, this rates reduction at this point is, to reduce what we've already agreed and consulted is absolute folly, and consultation issues that Sarah and Nick have framed. And so anyway, with all that in mind, I went and had a look at Nick's spreadsheet, and I see money out of all the areas absolutely dear to people's hearts and things that we really have to be getting on with. And I just want us to think about that. Regional air plan, internal comms, we've already been complaining about internal comms, but we're actually going to take that out. Natural hazards, what does that mean? Taking money out of there. Harbour plan, the lakes strategic plan, we want to ditch that. The overall strategic plan, well, how does that impact us? Integrated catchments.
Alexa, could we have a question, because we'll have an opportunity to debate once we move into
that.
Oh, okay.
Well, we will. We had a question from Nick. Okay, my question, Nick, is what is the impact of taking out things like integrated catchment plans? Does that take people off the ground? And the biodiversity fund, the biodiversity science, does this take people out of our catchment areas?
That's the point that I'm making is, I don't know. All I'm saying is that in year, like that's the same as the year plan. As we go through these slides, I can point some of these things out. But one of the things that we did in the LTP is we phased the increase into our integrated catchment management. We had 200,000 in year one, and then we've got it increasing 500,000 in year two. So, you know, you've asked what's driving the rates increase? Well, that is. But what's the impact if we don't do that or we defer it to year three? It would be very interesting. I actually think if you took that out now, I think that when we put out our consultation saying, oh, we've removed that, I think you will then get a huge amount of submissions from those very groups saying, we want that money back. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, the ferry service, do you remember all those people that signed that petition? And that's going to go, or some of it, that funding is going to go. So I just think
we're not saying anything's going to go. We're just pointing out that those things are where the increases are coming in year two. So if you're looking at the rates increase, they're the things that are driving it. Then if you go, those things, this is where we want the direction from council. If those things are really important and you absolutely have a bottom line that they have to still occur, then you need to find that amount of money from some other business as usual activity. So what is going to disappear then?
So one question.
It's not a simple question, and it's not a simple answer.
So one question on that was, if we, in this consultation question, if we go out with a reduced rate rise, will we specifically tell people what we are taking out that they have previously agreed to or even asked us for?
Oh, well, yes, we would. That's
we
why
have to.
We would have to go and redo the numbers, and then we would have to say, here's the things that have been removed. Here's the changes from what we consulted on previously in year two of the LTP.
And last one, to meet the timeline, we have to do all this by Friday, tomorrow, day after tomorrow.
We're already, if we got an agreement, we knew exactly what we were doing, and we could crunch the numbers pretty quickly. Would still potentially be 2 to 3 weeks behind. 30 June is really under pressure at that point. But if we have to go away and do a lot more work, like going away and going, no, all of those increases that are there have to stay, we have to find X amount from elsewhere, that's going to take a lot longer. And then there's no way that we're going to be making 30 June, because we'll have to go away, we'll have to do all the work, and then out of that we've got to come back to you to see whether that's acceptable, and then we've still got to prepare all the consultation material and everything. 30 June just would not happen in that case.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
Michael,
have you got a question, Michael?
Yes, I have. I've got a practical question. What's the current staff numbers for the ORC? How many existing vacancies are there? And what in the 22-23 plan is proposed to increase staff numbers?
Before you answer, Nick, can I just ask Sarah, from a procedural point of view, do we need to go under public excluded to, I know we're talking generally, but what's your advice?
I don't really understand where the question's going, and that's what I need to understand. But, as I've said to you previously, I think that talking about vacancies is quite complex. What I'd also say is that some vacancies are not, and I said this before, they're not new for next year's budget. They're just vacancies and roles that we already have in the structure. So I'm not sure really where the question's headed, but I do think anything that suggests any change to staffing levels needs to be dealt with sensitivity, and therefore, yes, I would recommend public excluded.
Okay. I think what we should do is move into public excluded so we can then focus on anything related to contractual arrangements or, as you've just alluded to, Sarah, any staff related commitments, etc. So I'll move that we.
Just before you do, while we're in public, could I ask a question that will be quite comfortable for public? I didn't realise that we're council rules are setting.
Okay.
So Mrs. Gardner, and yep, from Wednesday last week, and then we've sent the email through the chair asking various questions. Has there been no GM or yourself thought that here's an opportunity, here's some things within this organisation that perhaps we could be doing better to lessen the rate burden on our ratepayers? So what I'm saying is that, is there nothing actually appeared or nothing that you're aware of that could make this $100 million organisation just that wee bit better? And that would even be shifting something from this year to the next year. So none of that's come to light yet.
I wouldn't say that. I think that we all have ideas, but you know, whether or not they're going to meet the quantum that you're talking about, which is some number that we don't know yet, that's one question. Also,
Can I just reply to that? We actually have given you a quantum, and the quantum was to completely reduce the 3.5 million, the 18% of the general rate increase. So that was the quantum that was in there.
Yeah, right. So you're talking about
Secondly, we're actually looking for, you know, any suggestion. We actually haven't said you're inefficient, we're not doing things right. We've just asked, we've been asking, and we've said the world has changed. The world's changed in these last few months. We know what we have to do for our community and the environment, but we're saying that the world has changed, and we, you know, so you're giving us no indication of here's an actual saving we could make, or here's a change that we could make that might help us. So, but I wouldn't. If there are things there, that's the whole point of this of that email, is to find some starting point. Then we've got to make a political decision whether we want to go with that, with only that small reduction, whatever it be, or we want to go deeper. So, at a minimum, I'm very disappointed we haven't come up with anything, and I'm surprised we haven't come up with anything. So is there nothing?
I'm happy to give you. I'm happy to give you a whole lot of stuff. No problem at all. I can give you a whole lot of stuff, but I don't know whether you'll agree with it. So, for example,
unless you share it, unless you actually share it, Mrs. Gardner, how do we know? And that's the whole point of that was the whole point of sending that to you early, so you could. And it was even at the bottom that said, please give us a call to discuss. So no one's actually done that. So.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Malcolm. I understood you've had conversations with Nick.
Can I just?
Absolutely, certainly have. No, you can. But this is directed to my CE. Is we are looking. So if you've got plenty of ideas, we would like you to share those.
Okay. All right. Exactly.
That's what I thought we'd receive at some stage.
All right, then let's cut to the chase. There's no, I've no issue with that. So, for example, you have, now can you bring up the slide that has the amounts for things like the harbour plan, etc., please? As soon as we're going to cut to the chase. All right.
Hang on. General rates. There, that one at the top there, that's got there's 100,000 increase on the right hand side, second line down on the harbour plan.
Yeah. Thank you. So you'll remember that when we did the LTP, we had some last minute conversation around things to be added in. They weren't necessarily things that were fully scoped, and they weren't necessarily things that were part of the overarching strategic direction. They were quite last minute. So the harbour plan and the lake strategic plan are two of those things, for example. So you could look at taking those out. Now, why haven't I recommended those up front? Well, the lake strategic plan is something that we've talked to you previously about. There was a continued appetite for that. And just as recently as this week, the chair spoke to me about, or maybe last week actually, I apologise, the chair spoke to me again about the work of Mark Schellenberg and about the Guardians of Lake Wanaka, and about the scientific work that he was thinking was required for Alpine Lakes. So we didn't put that in, but I would recommend that you take that out. I'd also recommend that you take the harbour plan out. The reason why I recommend that is if we have to make these cuts, we have a coastal plan that we need to prepare. That is a statutory requirement. The harbour plan is not a statutory requirement. Therefore, I'd say take the harbour plan out. We also have various plans that are planned for this year. We have the air plan, which you pushed into year 2 to decrease the rates increase for the LTP. We also have, I can't quite see it, Nick, it's under regional planning, I believe, work on the coast plan as well. Now, they're statutory, they're requirements of us. We're getting, they're very old documents, and we're getting, we really do need to replace them. But rather than sacrifice work on what is our key strategic priority at the moment, which is our water work, then maybe you move those. I'm not recommending that necessarily. I'm saying you could look at those as a consideration. The other thing that I'm aware of is that we have costs that aren't actually anywhere in the budget. And they are things like, for example, the rating scheme review, which you decided on recently. We don't know how much that's going to cost, but you might want to revisit that. You might want to think about whether or not you can make changes to levels of service for some of the things that you were looking to increase in transport. The catchment liaison and integrated catchments, you've already made decisions and supported that, and we have rejigged the organisation to work in an integrated catchment way. So really, if you were going to make cuts there, it's about the support that we give to communities on the ground. So that would need to be something to be considered. You'll remember too that in the first 3 years of this LTP, we were increasing our biodiversity biosecurity work. There was a staged increase there. Now, the impact of that, of course, is on levels of service, because if you, for example, were to make a cut there, then you're literally talking about the work we're doing on the ground with things that are this council has made very clear are important to it around rabbits. So that becomes a bit of a challenge. There are, of course, 3 projects that you have in that have been sort of on the boiler for a while, some of which have now commenced, and communication with the community has commenced. But you have the work on Lake Hayes, which I think is the most advanced, but that you also have Lake Tuakatoto and Tomahawk Lagoon. Now, you might consider cutting those. Will that have some impact on the communities concerned? Yes, it would. But they are some areas where you might consider making some savings. I can carry on, but I guess what I'm saying to you is in every case, there is a benefit, which can be a potential saving, but there is a disbenefit in terms of the impact that makes on A, communities, and B, the progress we make in the environment, and C, the organisation in terms of the way we structured it to be able to respond to the work program that had been set. So it's not that I can't make recommendations to you, and I've mentioned now several. It's just that it's not as simple as making a recommendation and cutting a line out of a budget. there is a whole lot of implication that comes with that. And I thought it was important that we had that discussion and that clarity before we started perhaps putting lines through budget lines. But I hope that helps you, Councillor Malcolm.
It absolutely does, which goes back to the question that was asked originally. If we look at the harbour plan, which we have $100,000 in the budget, is there, the real question is there another way of doing that harbour plan that will cost less than $100,000? Like if we could do it for $91,000, that would be a 9% reduction. So, that's what we're looking at. We're not trying to cut service levels. We're trying to get everyone to cut the cloth to suit what the market is. So all of these things, we can cut any of those projects that you've just said, but that doesn't necessarily change what it will change. It will change the figures, but what it does, it doesn't change the way that we were going to do them. And is there a better way to do them? Is there a more efficient way to do them? Is there some other thing that we haven't looked at that will give us the opportunity to still complete our services, but save our ratepayer money?
Do you want me to answer that one?
Well,
Yep.
I'd rather.
Well, I think you're talking about two. Yeah, I think you're talking about two different things, though. That, like, if you take 100,000 for a harbour plan, it's an estimate. It's a budget estimate. Of course, we're going to be looking for the most efficient way to do that, but we could go through all sorts of line items like that and go, oh look, we'll shave 10 grand off that, or 15 or whatever. The reality is, until we get into doing the work, we don't know exactly how much it's going to cost, what's going to be involved. And that one there, for example, is a classic example of it. We're going to outsource that. And right now, everybody's putting their costs up. So I'd say, if anything, the likelihood, if you ask me, what should I do with that number? I should probably increase it to 110, 120, because it's probably going to cost more. We're going to struggle to get the work done for what we've even got in there. And then that's the efficiencies and the constraints we're working within. So what we've done here is we've put up, here's the list of all the things that are there. What we've pointed out is, I don't think it's feasible for us as staff to go through and say, pick that one, and that one, and then just take them out. I think you as council have to tell us what's important and what's not, because ultimately you're the ones who have to make the decision. So if we went and took out a whole lot of things and said, there you go, and you go, well, we don't like that, we're right back to square one. And we could still be going through this process in 3 or 4 months' time, just trying to pick and choose and keep coming back. So we need to know where we're going to be. Now, to go away to the it really goes down into the managers and saying, go and look at all of your activities. They will spend a huge amount of time. They will actually come up with very little, because these numbers are done at such a high level that they might go, oh, I could maybe shave a couple, not do this, and that might be a couple of grand there and 5 grand there. But what we're talking about is, and this is where it was interesting, that when the directive came out on Friday, we'd moved from you don't like 18% to you want the general rate increase to be 0. That's $3.5 million of reduction in spend. That is massive, and you're not going to get that by just going through and trimming a couple of grand here and there. You're going to have to take out whole pieces of activity, and you're going to have to significantly change what you're delivering to the public. And it means those things like, and this one that we're looking at, sort of 2/3 of the way down, integrated catchments, 448,000. That's the quantum of what you're talking about. And as the CE pointed out, you've then got to consider, what would that mean? What does that mean for catchment groups that we've gone out and talked to them so far about our long-term plan and our long-term plan to support them? And then not only are we now going, well, we'll pull that, But then where does that leave them? All of a sudden, their funding, their whole business program is out the door. So there's a lot more to this than you think. And what we need is, we actually need you as council to steer us in the right direction before we go away and start doing that.
Okay, what I'm going to suggest is that I've got a question from Hilary and Kate, and then I'm going to suggest that we do move into public excluded, for the reason being that the organisation may well have contractual arrangements with staff and or suppliers. So we can, now that we're cutting to the chase, I think we might as well have that conversation and public excluded as well. So we've then got all the, I suppose, possibilities from a staff perspective for us to then consider and move back into public to eventually make a decision. So Hilary, then Kate, and then we'll move into public excluded.
My question is, can we, or a sort of double-barreled question, can we have what service levels were intended to change for that 18% increase, and also what service levels changed for this year? Because to say that we've already agreed to something and we're halfway through it this year is all very well, but if we got halfway through it and those are service levels that we haven't yet filled, or we haven't yet performed, or we're not going to and we're having trouble finding people, or whatever it is, then those aren't going to happen this year. And so I think this year, some of this year's that haven't already happened of service levels, and next year's proposed service levels, I'd like to understand both those things. Is that possible to have what those are? The service levels this year that were proposed and haven't yet happened, and the service levels for next year that are proposed that increase the proposed rates.
That's a question.
That is I think it's a question for our CEO, because Nick has given us figures about the service levels. And when I say service levels, I mean, what are we trying to deliver? Because that, I mean, a service level, when you say service levels decrease or increase or something, it doesn't mean anything to ordinary people. So I think it's a question for our CE.
Well, perhaps we should go to the slide where that shows the service levels. You've got a slide, haven't you, Nick?
No, I don't. I've only got the numbers, but the reality is our levels of service, and then we have the levels of service are set at a very high level.
Yeah.
You know, they're almost, you know, the principle of what that service is about. And then you've got measures and targets. Each one of these line items doesn't have its own specific level of service or measure or target, but it's more about the agreement that you've already got with the community. Like, I'm trying to think, if you take water ferries, for example, I'm trying to remember whether we've actually got a measure or a target around water ferries in the LTP. I don't think we do. But the simple fact is that, you know, there's $500,000 worth of extra rates costs because of that. If we took that out, and we're not doing that, that's decreasing the level of service to the community, regardless of whether there's a specific level of service or a measure or a target. I mean, I don't know exactly what you want me to say about connecting, taking the cost out and to a specific level of service, because it's just inherent that you take that out. Like, you take out the air plan out of year 2, there's a level of service impact, and that it doesn't happen in year 2, it'll happen later. So the level of service is it's delayed, or you take it out and you don't do it at all. So I don't know why I need to explain that. It's pretty fundamental to the whole process.
The question from Mrs. Gardner was, what are the services such that people out there could realistically know? And it's going to be no use us saying we're proposing to take $500,000 out of a level of service to do with a ferry, they'll immediately ask, what does that mean? Are you going to cut the number of ferries, or what are you going to do? Saying 500,000 is as much detail as we get for a level of services is not something we can usefully consult people on. So I was wanting to know what the actual stuff we're doing, not the amount we're spending.
So, for example, you have the annual plan that we submit to the Minister for Primary Industries in regards to our pest management. Within that, we set a number of, we'll say we're going to do 7 facilitated targeted community efforts in 7 different places for rabbits, for example. Now, if you cut the budget, the level of service will decrease because we might only be able to afford to do 5. So 2 communities miss out. That's the sort of impact that you'll see on level of service. In a planning situation, we're supposed to have a regional air plan. Ours is out of date. We've pushed that already back 1 year. If you chose to push it back a further year, then the level of service issue relates to not only the fact that we don't have an air plan, but we also at the moment, because the funding ran out and we didn't have a new air plan, we also don't have an implementation strategy around, for example, what we've had in the past, like appliance replacements. So there's no opportunity for the community to access any kind of strategy or any kind of funding to improve air quality. So at the moment, we have a reduced level of service from what we had, and that would continue if you delayed the air plan, because that's the thing on which we would build the strategy. So that's what I'm saying about the flow-on effects of the decisions that get made. We've got programs around maintaining the gains. We've got the Taiari catchment work. We've got the Te Hakapupu work, for example. Now, our part in that is as much about in-kind staff time as it is about dollars. So if it be that you were to make cuts, for example, in the biodiversity space or the integrated catchment management space, then our ability to provide in kind becomes more difficult. And that's because a lot of that budget isn't necessarily anything other than staff time. So then the ability to provide that level of service has an impact as well. So generally, if you're making a significant change, then you will impact the level of service, because either we wouldn't have the staff to deliver the work, or we wouldn't have the operating budget that would be required in order to support the work. So, for example, we might have scientists, but we might not have operating budget to allow scientists to work on particular research programs or particular analysis, for example. Does that help you, Councillor Calvert?
Okay, moving on.
Thank you for trying.
One of the things, and I'm sorry, Nick, you gave this to us quite late last night, and that's not a criticism, but a comment on my inability to get my head around it after when I eventually got home. I think there's some mention in there of carryovers. What I'm very aware of, the world has changed in the last 2 years, and we must have had substantially less costs in transport and a few other things, and cars and vehicles. Where are those savings, or have they been absorbed into other things? And I appreciate we've had higher other costs like court costs and things like that. So where are those savings, and how do we see those? Are they in the reports, the annual reports?
So you're referring to the forecast information?
No, I'm looking backwards and saying there must have been some savings over the last 2 years, for example, on transport, not buses. I'm talking about our own operational costs, because we we haven't been driving everywhere so much. Staff have been doing things remotely a lot more. Where do we see those savings and efficiencies that, and have they been kept in potentially? Are we going to do a lot more on Zoom in the future? And not have those transport costs? Can we, yeah, does that make sense?
Oh, so you're talking about historically, have we been making, in previous years, have we made savings and therefore, you know, that if we've got those savings, we can use them going forward?
Well, partly that. Some of them will have been absorbed into other things like the court costs that weren't budgeted. I get that.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, have they been carried forward in this budget as potential long-term savings?
No, because the way that it works with what we do is we fully cost all of our expenses. So any costs in relation to that will, and I mean the actual costs of you know, our travel costs and our, you know, our vehicle running costs are actually not that significant in the scheme of, you know, $100 million budget. But all of those costs, they are fully allocated and via overheads and, you know, motor vehicle charges out into these numbers that you see in the activities. So if there was less of that cost, what it does is it comes through in the charge out rates that we use to charge staff time. And then that there'll be a corresponding adjustment. So effectively that all washes through. And when you get the year-end financial numbers or any of the quarterly numbers that you're getting, any movement up or down is already reflected in the variances you see. So if there is savings, you would see a line, you would see a particular activity where they might be under their budgeted spend. But then all of that gets amalgamated up, and at a consolidated group level, you then look at where are we at with all of our spend, and typically then any savings that there would be are more than absorbed with overspends that come out of like things like you say, like court costs and, you know, there'll be appeals and all sorts of different things. And yet where we always end up, and we report this, you know, in the year-end financials, and then we've shown this historically when we've done annual plan work, we have consistently over the last few years been overspending on our general rate funded activity. And as a result, that is getting funded from general reserve every year and unbudgeted general reserve expenditure, which is what we're seeing as what our forecast is to occur this year again in the forecast information that's in a later slide. And as a result, there's no savings or surplus to carry forward and utilise in future years. In fact, we have the opposite, that we have for year on year, we've continually been dipping into the general reserve to fund deficits caused by an increase in unbudgeted expenditure. And in a perfect world, what you would do is you would have a mechanism where if you were underspending and there was a surplus, you could carry that forward to reduce rates in future years, in the next year. But by the same token, if there was things that you didn't fund in the current year, you should be looking to then pick that up and fund that in the future year. We've been in that position, but we haven't been actually going back to recoup that funding.
Okay, I will move from the chair that we move into non-public under fixing by Carmen under the Local Government Official Information Act or Meeting Act, Section 7, bracketed 2A, to protect the privacy of natural persons. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
Chair, just to clarify, we're going to stop the live stream, so all councillors are available, and we'll restart the live stream when we go back into